Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with slow cooker red curry beef pot roast. That's right. What happens when you cross Southeast Asia and Midwest America? This happens. And this was incredibly delicious. So if you're someone that enjoys your comfort food on the exotic side, this is perfect for you. So here's what we did. First, we found a 3-pound piece of old beef. And I mean that literally. I found this hunk of meat in the half-off section in the meat department, and that stuff's generally there because of color, not because of taste or quality. The outside turns from red to gray, and they can't really sell it, so they have to mark it down. And I took advantage of that, and it was perfect for this. So you can read more about my old meat on the blog post. But what we're going to do is we're going to season that with salt and pepper on both sides, and we're going to brown it on high heat and just a few teaspoons of vegetable oil. You want to get a really nice sear on that because there's nothing sadder than putting an unbrowned piece of meat into a slow cooker. So we're not going to do that. So once it's well browned, you're going to turn off the heat, remove it from the pan. We're going to place that in our slow cooker on a bed of chopped onions. And all that means is place it on top of a chopped onion. We just call it a bed because, it sounds more comfortable. At that point, we're going to go back to our hot pan. The heat's off, but the pan's still hot. So I'm going to throw in a nice big spoon of red curry paste. All right, nothing fancy, right off the supermarket shelf. I'm also going to add some cumin and some coriander. And all we're going to do with the back of our spoon is just rub that spice mix into the hot oil just to wake it up a little bit. Technically, that's an optional step, but it does make me feel better. At that point, we're going to add a couple cups of chicken stock. All right, we're going to put our heat back on high. I'm also going to stir in a can of coconut milk. Love that stuff. All right, the exposure setting on the camera doesn't like it, but it is a wonderful product. So I'm going to give that a stir. I'm also going to toss in a can of diced tomatoes. I'm using the one that has the roasted green chilies in it. Very nice for this. We're also going to pour in some Asian fish sauce. Very critical ingredient. That's going to give the cooking liquid its saltiness and, even more important, its funkiness. And then we need a little brown sugar for sweetness to balance the saltiness and the funkiness. All right, I'm going to add a whole bunch of minced garlic. I'm going to add a spoon of tomato paste. And then some sliced ginger. I just peeled and sliced the root. And I just do it in big enough pieces you can pull out later. You could also grate it or mince it, up to you. And then last but not least, a little bit of fresh lime juice. And I'm not dirtying any strainer. Just squeeze it through your fingers and you'll catch all the seeds. And yes, we are working under the assumption that you do wash your hands thoroughly before you start cooking. You do, right? Good. So a little bit of fresh lime juice. We're going to give that a stir. And as soon as this comes up to a boil, we're going to carefully pour it over our pot roast. I'm also going to pop in a couple bay leaves, give that a little stir, and then we're going to cover that, and then we're going to let that slow cooker do its thing. All right, I'm going to do mine on low, which is going to take you maybe 7 or 8 hours to get this fork tender. You could also do it a little quicker on high, and we'll talk more about that on the blog post. But bottom line, you're going to let it braise in that slow cooker until the meat is fork tender. And I suggest using a fork to test it. So if you can stick the fork in with a minimum amount of effort, it's ready. And at that point, I'm going to remove my meat from the broth. All right, just the meat. Leave the other stuff in there. Because what we're going to do to finish this is braise some greens and cook some potatoes in this broth. It's going to be amazing. And at this point, if you want to skim a little of that fat off the top, hey, check it out. There I am. Hey, how you doing? Or you can take a ladle and skim a little of that off. Although in many parts of the world, you could get arrested for this. Because traditionally, curries like this, the fat is left to float on the top. It's considered a very important flavor component. All right, but we're going to skim a little off. So we're going to go ahead and prep our veggies. I have some little new potatoes I just cut in half. If you're working with big potatoes, just cut them in chunks. And then for a little greenage, we're going to use some baby bok choy, which are very easy to prep. Just cut off a little of the bottom. Slice the stalk parts into like 2-inch sections. And you can actually leave the leaves whole like that. All right, very simple. Once the veggies of your choice are prepped, go ahead and dump them into your broth. Poke it down. There should be just enough liquid to make it look like that. If you got to add a splash of water, go ahead. We're going to cover that. I'm going to turn that on to high, and I'm going to cook that until the potatoes are tender. How long is that going to take? I have no idea. But it doesn't matter. You're going to test them with a knife. And when they are tender, we're going to thicken this up just ever so slightly with a teaspoon of cornstarch that we're going to dissolve. And like a tablespoon of cold water, we're going to go ahead and stir that in. And I don't want this to be a thick gravy, but I do want that broth to thicken ever so slightly, just like 1 degree. All right, just to take it from watery to something that's a little closer to a sauce. All right, so stir that in. And then the last step here, I like to cut my meat into large chunks. Just makes it easy to serve. It also makes it quicker to heat through. So this is kind of turning into a stew, but that's okay. Everyone likes stew. So we're going to dump that in. I'm going to cover that and let that go for about 10 or 15 minutes. And as soon as that meat's heated through and that broth thickens up just ever so slightly, we're ready to taste and serve. So this really is a simple recipe. Sure, it takes a while, but you know what they say. You don't want to hurry a curry. But anyway, we're going to stick a spoon in there. We're going to taste it for seasoning. And if you're happy with it, dish it up. Look at that. You can already tell it's going to be awesome. And then to make this slightly even more awesome, we're going to top it with some crunchy roasted peanuts. Just chop them up. And a healthy dose of fresh cilantro. And that truly is an amazing bowl of food. I think it's just a really great technique for pot roast. And like you saw, a great way to use up a less than perfect piece of meat. And by the way, pro tip, you probably don't want to mention to your dining guests that you got the meat for half price. Sounds a little sketchy. But anyway, notwithstanding our suspect meat, this really did taste wonderful. That meat is just melt in your mouth tender. The potatoes soak up that rich, spicy, aromatic broth. And you can see there what I was talking about the cornstarch. That little bit doesn't really thicken it into a gravy. It just gives it a little extra body, which makes the broth extra nice. Just beautiful. So anyway, here's what you should do. Figure out where your slow cooker is, find it, dust it off, and give this great red curry beef pot roast recipe a try. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.